Ready.
All right, call to order at 5:03 p.m. And can you conduct the roll call, please?
Chair Heberlein,
Here.
Keith Johnson. Here. Rich Wallace,
Here.
Cynthia Russell.
Here.
John Andrews, is absent. Susan Myers, is absent. Eric Graham.
Here.
Elizabeth Peters.
Present.
And Paul Diller.
Here.
Okay, well, I just took away what, oh. Okay, thank you everyone for attending our third task force meeting. So we're going to go over the updated and new options for some additional discussion. And then we'll go over, well, we'll start with the planning commission and council input. We'll go over the new options and updated options. We'll have some discussion around that and an activity around that, and hopefully end up with a preferred alternative that at least a majority of the task force agrees on. Then we're also going to have a prompt for you all to consider whether to eliminate the increase to the building height currently allowed under the waiver. And then compare that with the preferred alternative, which is the ultimate preference of the task force. And then we'll end talking about the categories and menu items for additional discussion. So staff attended the planning commission on May 13th, and we got some general feedback from the planning commission based on a conversation around the task force's work from the April 21st meeting. Generally speaking, and in alignment with most of the task force input, is that the planning commission was supportive of a more limited waiver around the building height. So looking not at the option one, which was going up to 7 stories in the CMU. So they were more supportive of the more limited waiver. They also were supportive of this concept of the gradient decrease of building heights from I-5 to the residential area. So I know we had some discussion on April 21st around potentially treating the two mixed use areas that straddle the Main Street district potentially differently. And planning commission was generally supportive of this idea of a gradient decrease from in town center from I-5 to the residential area to the east. They also agreed with some of the task force discussion around looking at the menu items and revisiting those for potential additional updates. And then they also had a conversation about whether there could be a pause on the waiver being implemented altogether. So staff went back after that, and in particular, there was a discussion around a moratorium. So just for your information, a moratorium has a very specific meaning in state law. So generally when a moratorium is deployed is when a city finds that there is deficient infrastructure to support new construction or new development. So you need additional sewer capacity. So you need a sewer line that is run and maybe a pump station to get that sewer infrastructure to a new development area. And maybe that's not planned to occur. So a city can issue a moratorium it's a very limited duration. I think it's 120 days, can be extended, but it's a limited duration. There's a lot of noticing to the state that's required. And you have to, within that time frame, basically come up with a plan of how you're going to address that issue within a time frame. So generally, like I mentioned, moratoriums are typically used around infrastructure deficiencies, not necessarily, we just want to pause a land use regulation. So we'll get to how that has further, how that discussion has further evolved when we get to the city council meeting. But the long and short of it is to say is that a pause really isn't doable under Oregon law, because we really wouldn't recommend a moratorium as the mechanism to effectuate a pause. So then we went to city council last night. Generally speaking, the city council is interested in task force recommendations on the following issues. And this is gonna kind of lead our discussion tonight around the options, is first, whether the waiver to increase the building height should be in addition to that affordable housing bonus floor, or it's an either or option. So as you might recall from a couple of the options, particularly what you see in option 2 and option 3 that have moved forward, one contemplates the either or, and one contemplates the additional, that you can do both, at least in the mixed use area. So they want the task force to weigh in on that. They want the task force to weigh in on whether the increase should be separately considered in each of those mixed use areas that straddle the Main Street district. And then they also want you to consider, so we talked with them about the task force coming up with a preferred alternative on these options. And then also considering whether to eliminate the waiver to increase the building height altogether. So,
Susan just showed up.
hi Susan,
Funny
okay.
hers.
Document you're here.
Thank you.
Um,
And the front door is locked, so I don't know if anyone else.
Oh, it is?
oh, Tina, I have the.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you for letting us know.
Glad you got it. Well, for making it in.
So where this discussion around whether to eliminate arose out of was the planning commission's discussion around the pause. So since a pause is really not doable under state law, the city council would like you all to consider whether to eliminate the waiver to increase the building height altogether. What we did talk with council about, which is not necessarily needed for the task force discussion, but is if that is ultimately the recommendation that comes through the various processes with the task force and the planning commission, that the council is interested in essentially staff coming back after a period of time to evaluate the efficacy of the elimination, if that's what the ultimate outcome is. So putting a time period around that to come back and further discuss it. And then finally, they want you to weigh in on the potential updates to the menu items. So these 4 topics are really what's driving us, our conversation tonight, from the city council's feedback. So just briefly, I want to go over, check this top screen. Oh, there it goes. Focus.
And this is page 6
Yep.
of 7.
And I will say there is a typo in this chart that's in your packet. It is fixed here, and that is particularly on option 5. In your packet, option 5 had a minimum of 1 story under CMU. It should have been a minimum of 2 stories because there's no decrease contemplated in that option 5. So it's fixed here. Yeah.
Is it correct, looking at updated option 2, the MU East? The MU East on the very first one, option 2, updated option 2. I noticed that the original plan maximum is 3 stories. Right?
For NMU.
Oh.
For MU, it's
Thank
4.
Okay,
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, so updated option 2, essentially, and I kept in my comments so you could kind of see in the options, so you could kind of see where these additional changes are. So or where the differences are between each of these options, but essentially an updated option 2, it allows a decrease to 1 story in all of CMU and MU. It allows 1 additional story in both CMU and MU. But it does not allow that additional story if a bonus floor for affordable housing is being obtained. And then you'll see that there's additional parenthesis or parenthetical with some bolded language that if you want to separate out the mixed use areas west of Main Street District versus east of Main Street District, there's some additional language in that option 2 that's allowed. So kind of the long and short of it for updated option 2 is across all of MU and CMU, there'd be a minimum of 1 story allowed. And then potential increase up to 6 stories in CMU, up to 5 stories in MU West, and under either a waiver or a bonus floor. And then for MU East, up to 5 stories, but only for the bonus floor. Potentially. So then going to updated option 3. Updated option 3 is basically the only difference between it and option 2 is that it allows the bonus floor and the waiver potentially. So for both MU West and MU East, it could go up to 6 stories, or if MU East, if you separate that one out, you know, if you want to exclude that bonus floor or the waiver option for just that area, it could go 5 or 6 stories. But basically, it's an additional story under option 6 or option 3, excuse me. Option 5 is the one that Susan and Elizabeth and Paul, were you in that group? I think Paul's group discussed of not allowing any decrease west of the Main Street district, only allowing the increase, and then east of the Main Street district, only allowing the decrease. It does contemplate an either or for the bonus floor versus waiver. And then option 6 looks at for CMU not allowing the waiver to increase. So general questions about the differences between the two. You could kind of tell if we talk back about these questions, really what each of these options are getting at, or how do you feel about, you know, an allowance of building a waiver to increase and affordable housing bonus floor, or doing the either or option. And then also the separating out the mixed use, treating them separately really kind of drives how these options are sort of being created. So let me see. Okay, so first, are there questions about the options, the updated and new options that have been presented?
I had a clarifying question about what's allowed in CMU and MU. So like say if we were to choose option 5 or 6 that doesn't allow the decrease, would we be missing out on maybe like a big grocery store or something that would want to be 1 story by I-5?
That would be, yes, that would be the outcome, correct, in those areas.
What I would add is that for the most part, all the allowed uses in town center are the same. Where you end up having a distinction is like on the main street, you can't get the waiver. And that's to make sure that the main street gets built with the right form that's needed to create that pedestrian experience people want to see on a main street. So that's why the waiver is available in the other areas, but not on the main street or not in the NMU. And so that's a part of the distinction, but outside of like that kind of limitation on retail square footage, the uses are generally the same across the whole planning area. We're not super restrictive. It's fairly flexible in terms of where uses can go. So you could potentially be missing out on that by I-5, but also I would say that when you're thinking about this idea of potentially limiting on one side or the other, is that you also increase the potential to see it where you might want to see it. So I think some consideration about, you know, the CMU, some of the ideas there was that might be where you end up with more of your commercial mixed use. So things like offices or a hotel or performing arts space or something that's more commercial in nature, something that might want increased height by I-5. Also offering as a buffer noise to lower buildings on the east side. And so if you're wanting to see lower, like the single story closer to like the neighborhood mixed use, by reducing where it can go, you potentially put it where you want it to go. Now, if you may want it adjacent to I-5 too, so that could be, you could flip it if you're wanting to see the single story there. Based on the original plan, it was the increased height by I-5 and reducing. And so kind of where we allow things may influence where they ultimately go if we reduce where it goes in certain areas. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
So option 5 and 6, it looks like minimum and maximum stories are the same. It's just a difference in affordable housing or a waiver?
Yeah, so in option 5, it's really, the main difference is in the CMU, not in the mixed use, it's in the CMU where. Option 5 would allow it to go to 6 stories under a waiver or a bonus floor. But under option 6, it could only go to 6 stories under the bonus floor, the affordable housing bonus floor, not the waiver. Any other clarifying questions on the options? Okay, well. Not that this is the only time, you can ask questions as we move along if they pop up.
Thank you.
So what I think what we're looking for right now is maybe you all having, and and Chair Haberline can kind of lead the discussion, is you all having the discussion, to better understand, kind of the benefits or, drawbacks of the different options. And then what we will ultimately do is we're gonna do a dot exercise for you to pick out your, kind of top 2 alternatives. But basically, I think also what this discussion can get around, if you kind of go back to especially the first 2 questions, is it might eliminate one of the options. So for example, if you want some flexibility in CMU and you don't want to limit it to just bonus floor, like you want waiver or bonus floor, well, that's gonna eliminate option 6 and updated option 3. Or in updated option 3, that allows in MU the waiver and the bonus floor. If the task force is generally not in favor of that option, then we won't put that as one of the items for the dot exercise. So I'm gonna leave this one up to kind of those first 2 questions, because that might help spur. the
And
discussion
just a
around that.
reminder, you do have that table on page 6 of 7 in the
Yeah.
packet, so you can look at that at the same time.
So you said that the council was interested in our recommendations, in these areas. Was there discussion around waiver increase in addition to affordable bonus floor or separate?
As far as their opinions on it, there's only, I would say there's only one council member who really expressed one way or the other, who was not in favor of the waiver at all. And actually also not in favor of the affordable housing bonus floor. The others generally said they want to hear, they didn't express an opinion, they wanted to hear the task force's recommendation and the planning commission's recommendation. And I would say, generally speaking, too, from the planning commission, none of them really expressed an opinion one way or the other about where they were falling on this. It was more that they want the task force to further explore it.
I would say that the only way that they really weighed in was that the planning commission agreed with your input that 7 stories seemed higher than what was originally discussed in the plan that was adopted, and so they agreed with your input that that might be too tall. So to any extent they weighed in, it wasn't to say it should be an or, but it was to recognize that input that y'all gave.
So the planning commission also asked the question, I think this group did too, about defining adjacent. Do you remember we started to have that conversation about what is adjacent to the interstate?
Right.
I watched both meetings twice and I never did hear a resolution.
Mhm.
You said I could still ask.
Yeah,
Yeah, you can, I would say that that has not been determined. So typically that determination would be made through like a land use application. And then we would have to determine what that means. I don't know if it's in this section for defining through this process. So that's something we'd have to look into and get back to the group.
Well, as I'm thinking about it, it had more to do, I think, with the Sherry's problem.
Oh.
They were talking about, okay, we'll just zone that separately.
Oh, that
that-
discussion,
I think
sorry.
That's where that.
Okay,
okay, yeah, so the Sherry,
to reiterate what the planning commission said is, while you look up it, pull up a map or something.
Yeah.
Is, the approved development, sits on a parcel that currently has the sub-district MU under it. And so one of the questions the planning commission asked was, well, what if we just designated that CMU instead of MU.
Right.
And then, I raised an issue, which is that we don't typically do spot rezoning, even though I'm not sure it's a rezoning. That's a deeper question, but, there's two other parcels that then would essentially become CMU as opposed to MU. And we didn't feel that that was, a better solution to move forward, hearing the concerns about the like, the fact that there's continued support for the transect and lower story buildings in general, like lower height, that if we add more land to the CMU, that's more land that then becomes eligible for a potentially that 6-story. And so we didn't feel like that was actually an option that really was in line with the feedback we've heard. Even though it was an interesting idea. And what I would say to that is that part of that discussion was rooted in the conversation we had here as well as there about whether the existing land use approval would become non-conforming based on the decision that y'all are making. And so I spent some time thinking that through, rereading definitions and non-conforming use zoning code language. And I actually have determined it would not become non-conforming based on this decision. Based on what we're changing here, it actually doesn't meet the definition of non-conforming structure in our code. So it kind of becomes a moot point for the reason why we were potentially looking into it. And then we felt like it would just be adding more land to the area that would become taller, which is what we're hearing is the concern. So we felt like these options that we put in front of you today are more consistent with the feedback we've heard.
Yeah, and generally speaking too, if ultimately, there is a decision at some level upon the third, it essentially kind of eliminates the need to do a rezoning or a change in the overlay at that point, so, yeah, so with Miranda's analysis and, you know, if it ultimately leads to that, it just seemed, like additional process when there are easier mechanisms to get to the feedback we're hearing.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Can we talk about point number 3?
We will talk about point number 3.
We're gonna go in.
Yeah, because what we want to do is, even if ultimately the decision is eliminate the waiver to increase the building height altogether, let's say 3 years from now, we go back to council and council wants to re-explore it. We want to make sure we have something documented from the task force about where you landed on the options, so they have that feedback. Because you're spending the time looking through it, and we want to make sure that we have that documented. So we want to still walk away with whatever the preferred alternative option is, even if ultimately the task force says the ultimate recommendation is to move forward with eliminating the building height. I think.
So for the first bullet, are there 2 options or 3? The option of having either, the option of having just an affordable housing bonus floor, or an option for a waiver only? Are there technically 3 options that we are deciding between, or is there really only 2?
I think we're looking between 2, which is,
Well, technically, there's 3, if you look at all sub-districts, because in option 6 and updated option 3 for CMU, it's only bonus floor.
Yeah.
And then in option 2, option 5, and then for some of the mixed use in the other options, it's an either or. And option 3 is an and. So they're depending on the sub-district you're talking about, yes, ultimately there are kind of 3 options, but I think
so basically what we want your input on is whether you're in favor of them being able to get 2 stories, being able to take advantage of both. So that's an and. So they can get the waiver and the affordable housing bonus. So up to 2 additional stories. And or they get one or the other. Or you want to say that they can only get one, and it's only one if they're doing the affordable housing bonus, but not for a waiver. Those are kind of like just asking you, like, do you have a preference on those things? Because if like nobody around the table supports an and option, then that would essentially eliminate, is it option two?
Three.
Three, okay, thanks. See, I can't keep straight the options, but
It's been a short time.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think we were talking about the original options last night.
Yeah.
So, you know, that would eliminate essentially option three from our discussion and our voting exercise.
Yeah.
But we want to give you guys an opportunity to be able to talk about that in terms of like where you're kind of feeling about the idea of an either or, an and, or just affordable housing.
But I guess for option three, the question really is for mixed use east. Is the task force comfortable with a potential of 6 stories in that area?
So-
Personally, I think that's a hard no, based on the more extensive citizen input that we went through for years. They were very concerned, and that's why we came up with this CM here. And it was very intentional. So to, this is just my opinion, I only one at the table. But for me, I have to say that is out of line with what the citizens wanted out of this.
Getting general head nods from that
That
side,
feels like.
and I can't see this side as well. Any thoughts?
I just had a quick clarifying question.
Yeah.
So for CMU, does that mean like if we only allow them to have an increase for affordable housing? Does that mean there's like a floor of affordable housing over office space? Or like the performing arts center or something?
It could be, I believe it can be both, I believe, well, it's a percent of the units? Or percent of the
25% of the units.
But it's not like
So
an affordable housing building. It would be like office space or other commercial
Or-
uses.
Or additional residential. But not necessarily 100% affordable housing project, if that's what you mean.
Could you have a building that was commercial only?
In
Is it
CMU?
Commercial mixed use, yeah.
Yeah, but you wouldn't, then
Couldn't
qualify,
get-
you couldn't get the bonus floor for the affordable housing.
And the affordable housing doesn't have to be on one floor if you get a bonus, right?
Correct.
Unit you're doing.
So you could see a scenario of, you would need a certain amount of residential units. And
So
only
maybe-
25% have to be affordable,
Okay,
but you could have 100% affordable if they decide to do that. The way it's written, it could be in a building that is 100% residential or in a mix of residential and commercial.
okay,
Which could be office or retail or
okay.
other things.
So it's not that we would necessarily end up with a bunch of like office space buildings with kind of pieces of residential units within them.
Unlikely. I
Okay,
haven't seen really any development like that.
okay,
I can also tell you from a developer standpoint. If you're doing 25% affordable. But there's no other units in the building, then it default would be all affordable.
Yeah,
And you would never add affordable units, just to add
Okay.
affordable units.
okay. That's helpful.
Yes.
I mean, right now, the ones I like are options 5 and 6.
Yeah, I also. Not a fan of option 3, kind of for different reasons too, like that it only allows an increase for affordable housing. Which I think it makes it less flexible. And if we allow an increase for the waiver, then that means we're getting something in return for that increase, which is something off the menu items. So I'm kind of also leaning towards 5 or 6.
So anybody want to keep option 3 at this point? Sounding like no, but I want to make sure I ask the question so that anybody has the opportunity to say it. Okay, so it sounds like option 3 is out.
great, we're down to 3. And we can vote on 3, or we can vote on 2, whatever you guys want.
And let's be honest, you all might come up with an option 7.
So I have another clarifying question. So, I now understand how the bonus floor came into being and how the waivers came into being. The waivers also have an affordable housing. And so, I'm just wondering, why do we need both? Why don't we just say waivers and put affordable housing?
Yeah, I think we'll actually probably talk about that in the menu item discussion. Because the feedback that we've gotten, not only from members of the task force, but also from, some of the planning commission is maybe that item in the menu should just be taken out.
Okay.
I think everyone can recognize there's some cleanup that needs to happen. I mean, it was split from one menu into two menus based on two themes during a public hearing. We did our best to write the things down. And I think affordable housing was mentioned, so we included it without really thinking about the fact that we had this other affordable housing decision in code that we had made like a year earlier. So we just didn't make that connection during the meeting. So yeah, absolutely, we need to clean that up. We can talk about that.
I personally, you would ask the question, do we like, you know, waivers or bonus or both or either or? Or both, that was the third option. And I guess I like one or the other. If we're gonna do waivers, I think it should be one or the other, not both.
And if for some reason we put the affordable housing into the waiver, then that would essentially meet that same objective.
Exactly.
And I think one or the other is kind of, I guess, other than maybe MU. Maybe for CMU, that's kind of, I think, the only way to stay on their set of stories, right? Because I think if we do one or the other, or bonus or whatever, that's really the only way we're able to stay on their set of stories, right? Because if we do and.
In the CMU.
In the CMU, correct. Yep.
What if,
Yeah, and you'll basically see, sorry, is that with updated option 3, what it generally does if you're not saying the and, is it makes it so in mixed use, you're not getting them to 6. You'd be getting a 5.
I'm confused, I'm sorry. So the max number is if they apply one of these things, they'd be getting, for instance, in option 5, C, and you would be 5 stories, but if they apply for either a waiver or a bonus for it, it'd be just 6.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. Okay, so I think we've ruled out option 3. Thank you. I think maybe, Chair, do you want to talk about the second question? Because that's where a lot of the distinction is in the options too.
For each MU area. And you're just talking about east
Yeah.
and west.
Yeah,
East
so.
and west of the main
So
street.
you have the printed off sub-districts to help you out, so it's looking at
Yeah.
this kind of corner down here to the west and then this area to the east.
And I would note, because we've been having this discussion, we went back and I reread the descriptions of the sub-districts in the plan itself. And so, I would note that one of the things that describes the MU area as is a transition between the other districts it's between. There was kind of this clear vision for the Main Street. There was this clear vision for kind of the neighborhood mixed use and what we wanted to see adjacent to the neighborhood. I would say there was also kind of a clear vision for adjacent to I-5, allowing it to be taller, having more of the commercial uses potentially, and offering as a buffer to the freeway between that and the lower density, the other direction. And so it was more like the in-between spaces, right? And so we really saw them as being a transition between what they're surrounded by. And that includes to like Wilsonville Road. So I was rereading that description and I thought that might be valuable to kind of provide to you guys as you consider this.
Should be. And I guess for me, this one really comes down to, do we want to allow a minimum of 1 story in the mixed use west or not?
And in the CMU.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes, yeah, correct. Yeah, thanks, Paul.
I think this one comes down to whether you want to allow MU East to be eventually 5 stories versus
Yes.
4,
yeah.
I'm for less.
right?
I for some reason was envisioning. And I probably have my memory wrong, but envisioning the MU East to be something overall less than the MU West. And to see that we can have 5 stories in both. I'm kind of
Yeah.
scratching my head. I thought. If you were to ask me, I would have said MU East would have a maximum of 4 stories.
Yeah.
And. But is there a reason why it's 5 stories? Was it what you heard from
The
us?
reason, no, I would say that, what we heard from you was the desire for it to be shorter. Which is why they're not allowed to get the waiver in that area. Right now, the bonus floor for affordable housing is not in this section of code. So it's not the area that you have been asked to look at. But it is interrelated in the sense that technically a bonus floor could be achieved through the affordable housing
That could
provision.
to that.
And so it could get up to 5 stories if they provided that affordable housing, but that's the only way they could get to 5 stories. They wouldn't be able to get to 5 stories through a waiver. And that's why it's written that way. At this point, we have not been directed to look at that affordable housing bonus. But I think that we could note, that the option 5, if like, depending upon how the whole group feels. And I think you should discuss this, is like, if that's how you would prefer option 5 to be, we can take that information forward.
Yeah, I mean, for option 5, for option
5 or
2,
6.
5 or 6, if the feedback from the task force is. We want MUEs treated differently, and also. We'd recommend that planning commission, city council look at that note 4 and its applicability to MU East. That's something we can document and take back.
Would it have to be looking at the note, or could it be that MU East is changed to allow a max of 3, so then they could get 4 within affordable housing?
Yeah, I think our concern would be if you go and change the outright permitted uses, then you're getting into. Probably a rezoning effort where we have to notice, where we have to do additional noticing, versus. I think the note, because it's an additional bonus floor, would be. Treated differently. But I
Right,
would-
right now, we're talking about waivers and bonus floors, and they're not things that are outright allowed. Versus the outright allowed, clear and objective standards. Correct.
And again, just piggybacking on what Susan was saying. If we separate MU West and East, can we just say no waivers on MU East?
And no bonus floor.
I mean, it basically says no waivers. I think at this point, we're not sure whether we can tell you. Yes, we can say that because the resolution didn't direct us to look at that. It also didn't direct us to look at the question we're about to ask you later, which is, should we get rid of it to increase? So at this point, we're gonna gather the feedback and how the majority feels around that. And so if that's where we land, you land as a group, then we'll record that and put that forth to the planning commission and council for consideration. Because I do think that, you know, there's the potential for consolidation to make things make the most sense. But that's not a decision that we can say we know is something we can do at this point,
Sure,
but it's definitely feedback we can take forward.
but I would support that, and like Susan, I've been listening to the community feedback, planning commission and so on. And I think if we do separate them, that gives us that opportunity to make it more palatable to the community. To have no waiver and no bonus
For MU East.
for MUE.
On all the,
Oh,
on all the options.
I was gonna say,
I'm not sure.
chair can recognize Paul.
Yeah, go ahead.
Question, didn't you say, Miranda, at our last meeting or the first meeting that these bonuses, no one's really using them anyway right now with the current economics? Somebody said that.
I believe what I said was, we haven't, I mean, no one's taken advantage of it so far. And historically, we haven't seen a lot of, like mixed income projects, but we often with affordable housing financing see like an affordable housing building because of the way
Yeah.
that financing works.
Mhm.
However, that's kind of why we wrote the language in some ways the way we did, to try to incentivize even a sprinkling of units into a town center that otherwise might eliminate, like be too expensive for everybody with new construction. And so I don't know if it is enticing enough. And I think I did hear Eric mention at the last meeting that it actually might be
Well,
enticing,
I'm
because
curious,
it's
do you
not
have-
too high of a bar.
Do you have 5-story apartment buildings being built that would be eligible to add a story for this bonus presently?
Well, we've entitled one
I
at
mean,
5 stories.
Wilsonville wide, like the broader code, broader area.
No, we don't have any other affordable housing bonuses. The only affordable housing bonus we have is for town center.
Oh, okay, I just wanted to make sure there's not precedent.
But that brings up a good point, is that one that we were talking about that's being built at the Sherry site, they opted to do the waiver and not the bonus form. They could have done both
Mhm,
currently, so.
And there are 5 stores.
correct.
So the reason I asked is if the economic realities don't really support that right now, it's a little bit of a hypothetical discussion. Because 5 stories only bonus allowed might really.
Mhm.
Or, and it could also be, as Elizabeth mentioned, when you get into the menu items. It might be that where the task force lands is, well, we still want maybe an opportunity to incentivize affordable housing, and maybe that's done through the menu items rather than through the note. But it's these are all items for research.
So in terms of. MU East. Say. Say a bunch of buildings are being built, maybe they, well, sorts. And someone came in and requested to do 5 stories, if we allowed. Waiver, bonus score, that's still in there. Would that? If that was going through an approval process, would it be approved? Like, do we have the option? Where we have a bunch of like 3-story buildings and there's just 5-story building in the middle of them?
Yeah, do you maybe want to talk a little bit about how, like, let's just assume for purposes it's a waiver.
Yeah, so in the,
Or could we say that like that doesn't align with how it's being built, and so we would then be able to deny it?
I mean, through the waiver process is a more subjective review because it's not just following the clear and objective path of land use application. So there is subjectivity that's provided to planning staff to be able to look at, like, how does this fit? You know, there's different goals within the code around harmonious design and whether it's kind of meeting the different standards. We would probably work with them on like which menu items to use in order to decrease the impact. You know, if it was a really bad project, we could potentially deny it. It's very hard for me to live in hypotheticals. You're hearing me already do this because until we see an application, sometimes you don't know. There is some right given to them through the waiver process of like, if you meet things in these menus, you technically can get this thing. So there is some level of like, I can't just deny because I don't like it. But because it is subjective, I could talk about like the fit of the adjacent buildings and which menu items might be more appropriate in order to better address that transition. How,
And we're, so, based on the map. It says that the Main Street District, which is gonna be between east and west. Generally 3 to 4 stories.
2 to 4 is what's outright
allowed, but what's envisioned is hopefully 3 to 4.
Okay, so we might end up with tall buildings, shorter buildings, tall buildings.
I mean, what we have right now is kind of like with the one over by the theater is a 3-story building and then parking lot all around it. So that's worse, if you ask me.
Yes.
Right. And so in the NMU, they have the use of a bonus floor too.
the entire town center area at this point in time has the ability to get the affordable housing bonus floor.
But not, no, not NM. MS.
Oh, not in any,
And, Main Street District, MU and CMU are allowed to, but not MU.
Sorry.
But yeah, I like, and as far as if we're still on the question about east and west, I like separating them so that we do kind of have that buffer between NMU and MSD and CMU and MSD, kind of having that gradual gradient like we talked about. I like that.
Is there anybody that wants to keep option 2? Because that's where MU and NMU are tied together essentially.
I'm not terribly interested in it because I like that split between east and west.
Yeah, I'm not really interested in option 2 either. Same reason.
I agree.
I'm happy to get rid of option. Stick with 5 and 6.
The only thing that, what I like about option 2 is the ability to go to one store.
And see.
Because
All
what
the
if
way
there's a
across.
grocery store? At one
In
second.
MU West as well as
In
east?
CME,
There's lots of grocery stores with multi-story grocery stores. all around.
important. I'm curious if you ever answered the question of what the story is.
Yes,
Yeah, I put it in your packet.
I'm sorry.
it's, I think it was in the April 21. I can get that.
I might have seen it, sorry.
Yeah, I better not try to go on
It
memory.
is defined in our, it is.
It's defined in the code, it does not include the basement. And, we don't like allow, we also don't allow like, partial or vacant.
A story is defined as that portion of a building included between a floor and the ceiling next above it, exclusive of a basement.
Okay.
So between floor and ceiling.
Is a mezzanine a story?
What?
Is a mezzanine a story?
You know, I think,
I ask because it's relevant to grocery stores, at least the grocery store we most recently built in Hillsborough has a mezzanine. It's not a complete story.
Oh, like
But you walk
an
in,
office area
It's got an office
upstairs.
area,
Right.
community room, and things like that.
yeah.
so now I gotta go look back at our internal staff revisions because one of our staff people actually brought that
Yeah, I'm not trying
exact
to be
one
difficult,
up.
It's just like,
And I gotta remember what
that is
the
a
comment
typology
was.
out there.
Which grocery store?
It's a market of choice, in Reed's Crossing.
Yeah, wasn't there?
And a mechanical floor is not a floor.
No.
And so the Safeway building, if a mezzanine is included, has 2 stories.
So depending upon the interior design and without, I've never noticed the Safeway interior,
Yeah,
if I'm being honest. But, I feel like it would depend on how it's designed, cause is the mezzanine still, is the ceiling the same as the ceiling that's for the rest of the store?
Think so.
you've got a high ceiling for the store and then you've got the mezzanine that has that same height.
The same ceiling.
Yeah.
small.
So it's, you've got the same ceiling and the same, and then you have a floor, but the mezzanine is like this, but it's under the same ceiling.
Right.
That would be defined as 1 story.
It needs to extend to the whole building. To be.
Cause they're basically, they have the same ceiling, they don't
You
have
that
different ceilings.
foundation difference between the
Mhm.
main ceiling
Mhm.
of the store and the mezzanine to count as a second story.
That's how I would define it.
But it could be offset by like a foot.
I mean, I probably wouldn't accept that,
Okay.
because then you're not having a whole separate operating floor.
The other difference on option 2 is it allows a decrease. And when you say decrease, you mean we can go below.
To one story.
Oh,
Because 2 stories is the minimum everywhere.
okay.
So that's why I say, I mean, I know it's important for discussion that you all feel good about whatever option is the preferred alternative. There could be an option 7. That is minimum of 1 story everywhere. But MU East is still treated differently than MU West. That could be an outcome. It's not one of the ones, I don't think that's. Yeah, that's not one, because option 5 and option 6 both contemplate no decrease. West of Main Street District.
Looking at our map, I would not personally object to having a one-story grocery store in this. It's quite a bit of space. You would have to come in off the freeway. You know, if we're looking at it on paper. You know, the question is, do we allow one story here? But I think really we want neighborhood use to be closer to neighborhood and higher density towards the freeway. So for that reason, I'm okay with one story here, but keeping more height here. And if a grocery store really wants to be seen by the freeway, they'll put residential above or something else.
No, I thought about as we were discussing it. Cuts first, it's been there forever, they have the offices.
Correct.
I had a think about floor plate. So if they get a bonus floor or waiver, extra floor, they can't increase the floor plate.
Correct. That's the language, that's the part of the update that we did in all of these, was to clarify that the larger floor plate is only contemplated with going down.
Okay,
It's not contemplated with going up.
okay, so so if a grocery store comes in and they want a 2-story building, it'd have to be a 2-story with the allowed floor plate. Since they aren't decreasing, they
Mhm.
can't increase it.
Yeah.
It would depend on what's on the second story.
Well, yeah, that's fair. That's a fair point.
Would it?
Because the 30,000 square feet is tied to retail uses.
So there isn't the same floor plate restriction for other uses that there is for a single user retailer.
Okay,
And that was intentionally because during the process, there was a desire to move away from really big box retail and want to move more towards the kind of more diverse and local type of retailers that were desired through the planning process. And part of that, and so when we ended up in the floor plate, there was a whole discussion before we even got to the final waiver and the menus, which was tied to what is the size that we want to pick for a single user retail. And so we pulled in an economics specialist who looked at the average floor plates of different retailers across the country and what their average kind of building size they were constructing in 2018, 2019 when we were looking at it. And based on that information, we talked about, well, like, here are all the types of uses we heard that people want in terms of retail specifically. And the majority all fit within that 30,000 foot envelope and didn't need to go to the 50,000. But for some of them, they were like kind of right on the cusp, right? Like sitting right around 30,000. And so anytime you're in code, you're like, you gotta pick a number. But what if somebody's like, 1,000 feet over that versus all the way up to 50,000? And so that's where we came up with this waiver of having some level of allowing some size beyond 30 as the cutoff to be able to have a judgment call of, okay, well, there are 35,000 square foot Whole Foods, and they're also providing a coffee shop, which is providing, a community gathering place. Like that still fits the vision of the plan. And so we want to be able to have the ability to provide, be able to say yes to something like that fits the plan. And so that's one of the measures for the waiver is, we have to make that subjective determination. Does it match the plan? So yes, it does. And also they have to do these thing from each menu. So that's kind of that's where that whole floor plate came into this discussion and actually was the origination for all of this. Fun fact.
okay. Yeah.
So I don't mean to open up a can of worms here, but neighborhoods mixed use. Yeah, they don't have the option of going down to 1 story. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Because neighborhood mixed use. I mean, this was envisioned for neighborhood services. So do we allow that to have a waiver to drop down to one store.
So the choice that was made at the time,
Uh-huh.
is what I can report on. And it was to not include it in NMU for the reason of not wanting to stick, like, if it is gonna be a bigger box retailer, not necessarily wanting to stick
Having
that right next to
Absolutely agree.
the neighborhood,
But we have-
or right next to townhouses. It
Yeah.
was this idea of that it would be in a little, in the more mixed use area, and that was the rationale for it.
Okay.
Because at the time, that some of this originated was we had heard consistently, got input consistently around 2 stories as a minimum. Which,
Mhm.
to jump right into a 40-year planning on that, when the majority of your town center is 1 story, you know, you sometimes need some transition time
Right.
and some flexibility. And same thing with like the floor plate, it's like, we may need some flexibility around that. And so the question was then, how do we do that? And where do we wanna do that? And what the planning commission landed on was these 2 areas, these 2 sub-districts, because we were less, we felt like we didn't need to control them as much.
Okay.
Whereas there was a lot of desire to continue to control what we saw in the Main Street district and the neighborhood,
Okay.
mixed use. So, because yeah.
Thank you.
I'm guessing staff will say we can't do this because it's a zone change and requires notice, but can we pass along an interest that there is a preference for allowing the 1 story for grocery stores only?
I don't mind making grocery stores get out of the habit, and become 2
You don't-
stories.
Okay,
I know it's been a lot of
And I-
examples.
I see plenty of 2-story grocery stores. But now hearing the definition of story, I'm thinking like market choice in West Land, where you can sit upstairs, but that would count as a store.
I will say, I
Just
think it is a very significant challenge to make anything like a grocery store chain get out of any sort of habit. Like, it's gonna do what it knows works.
And if we have too high of a bar, then they won't.
Yeah.
They'll go to the next.
So are you
I
saying,
think there's a worthwhile conversation around how do we make it, how do we write the code so that it facilitates having a grocery store where a grocery store wants to be without opening a can of worms around 1-story buildings. I wonder if something like converting stories to a height limit, so some absolute unit makes more
that's a
sense.
good idea, yeah.
Then a mezzanine.
Because the other folly that you potentially could rent, there was a building that we built in Sacramento. That was 65 feet or something like that, and it was 4 stories. Normally a 60-some building is like 5 or 6 stories, but it was 4 stories to meet the 4-story limit by having mezzanines. So like every apartment building was 20 feet tall, and it had a mezzanine.
Wow.
There was another bedroom, but it wasn't, you know.
Nice.
So there are tricky ways around terminology, I suppose, is all I would caution.
So I feel
Sorry.
like, I
think
think
that's
we
nice.
probably need to move into the voting exercise. We're an hour into this meeting. So here's what I'm gonna say. I think we're gonna put option 2, 5, and 6 up there because I still heard like a couple comments about the positivity of option 2. So I'm gonna leave, I think we should leave all 3 up. We're gonna put a piece of paper for each one. And then you can you're gonna put a sticky dot for your number 1 choice, which will be this hot neon red will be your number 1. And then the neon orange, the lighter color, will be your number 2. You're only gonna get 2 votes, number 1, number 2. If there is I support it, but with this change, then put an asterisk on your sticky with a note to the side of it.
Could you say that one more time?
So if you wanted to say, let's say I wanted to pick option 2, but only with, I don't know, a certain change. That in, let's say,
No bonus floor
no bonus floor
on mixed use east.
in mixed uses, then put an asterisk on the dot you put up there with the note next to it of what you would change. That way, if you're like, the option 2 is my favorite, but I want this change to it, then go ahead and note that, because I don't wanna fully restrict further ideas that you might have.
But do we have consensus on? And I'm asking the question, I'm not trying to influence anyone. Do we have consensus that we want MU East to not exceed 4 stories?
That would be the asterisk, right?
That would be your asterisk
We
at
would
this
write
point.
that on.
And then we'll see what lands on the paper, and then we can have further discussion.
And what I would also say is, how you all are picked up is obviously by this owl. We're gonna be putting this up probably on a wall somewhere. So try not to have conversations with each other while you're putting up your stickies, because it's not going to pick up your voices. Save the discussion for when we reconvene, together, okay? So Miranda can hand out stickies, put these up.
We can put one sticky on.
Just one.
One red and one orange.
One red,
Tempted to vote more than.
which is your number one. And one orange. I don't have enough of these, so,
Just in case.
I'll write these
This
off.
is one and this is.
No, you just take one red, one of each, so.
Just one of each.
Yeah.
Number 1 is red, number 2 is orange.
Correct.
Yeah,
Number 1,
yes.
number 2.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because to me, this looks orange, but this is red and that's me.
They're neon. I'm gonna
Yeah.
split yours in half. Yeah, perfect. And if you
And also
split-
feel
yeah,
free
perfect.
during this time if
Thank
you know, need to use the restroom or
This is
get some more
first.
food.
First.
Good time also with that. Right, so maybe take, it's 6:05, so maybe take the next 10 minutes. We'll reconvene at 6:15.
Okay.
No, not yet. Although one may come out of, if there's enough asterisks on
Yeah.
one of the, on the preferred option. So everybody's voted. Does staff want to ask questions, or, I mean, it seems like there's a clear preference for option 5 as number 1. With option 6 as number 2.
Yes, although I would say that based on, like, if we use kind of like the ranked voting system where you put points to each dot, then in some ways, option 5 and option 6 kind of tie, because you have more dots on option 6. It's just that most of them are people's second choice. So they technically tie, and I would say that the tiebreaker probably would go to the one that got the most number 1s, which would be option 5, but I feel like that is a task force determination.
And do you want to report out on that comment?
Yeah, and then I would say that it appears that essentially, in those options, that 3 of 8, so almost half of you, would like to see a max of 4 stories in the MU East. So I think that's something that can be discussed in terms of the, what the preferred option is that you all decide on. And I don't know if that will end up being achievable, but that can be a part of the
Yeah, it could be a
recommendation if
recommendation.
chosen.
Sure.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a good discussion starter. So in either option, 5 or 6, what are the thoughts?
And would it be helpful to have that back up on the screen or?
Sure. Yeah. What's the thoughts around the idea of limiting mixed use east to 4 stories?
Well, I liked option 5 over 6 because of the, had more flexibility with doing either housing or waiver.
Yeah.
But about the mixed use east, I see that, I mean, it says in the zoning 2 to 4, and then the bonus is for if they add affordable housing, so. I kind of like leaving it because I like incentivizing to have more affordable housing in our town center. I think 5 stories isn't too high for me personally, in that particular zone because it is kind of like an intermediary. So yeah, I'm fine with personally leaving it.
Other thoughts?
I'd say I liked option 5 for the same reason, the flexibility, the or option that was in there. I'm also fine with 5 stories. I mean, it sounds like the affordable housing option isn't necessarily something that people pick up on that much in terms of wanting to take advantage of it. But I like that we have more of an option to allow that. I think I would say my preference is option 5 as is.
Okay, so option 5, keeping the allowance for 5 stories.
So I would switch my vote to option 5 if we could max it at 4
Yeah,
For the MU East.
for MU East. Yeah, and that's because, again, I've been listening to the community. And what they've been saying is, these higher buildings are not what they want to see. They really value a small town theater of Wilsonville. We had an amazing turnout on the whole last fall. We've had, and again, I've watched. I have no life. I've been watching the planning commission meeting and the council meeting, and the voice of the community says, let's keep it as small, feeling like it's. So I would change my vote to 5.
If,
For my
if
first,
it was limited to 4 stories.
if it was limited.
if
to 4 stories.
MUE was,
5 with the asterisk.
Yeah. I echo that, I liked Susan's idea, like less, just after 4 stories, this is the small town feels. I felt that strongly from the community as well.
and I mean, I understand that we want to keep it at a minimum of 2 stories in the commercial. So I like 1 story because it gives them more options. But I would change it.
So under option 5, we are allowing 1 story next to the freeway.
No.
No,
2 stories.
it was, the packet had a typo.
Okay. I
Uh,
was gonna say,
the
that's not
screen
what I thought I
is,
voted.
yeah.
on.
mhm.
Oh,
Yeah.
Thank you. I was regretting my vote.
Phew.
Finding. Oh, change it.
Mhm. Do you want to expand or make any notes?
Well, I'm not really hearing anyone change their opinion, so I think we as a group are agreeing to 5 as our first choice. And there is a number of us who would like to put forth considering limiting MU East to 4 stars.
I will say if that's a decision that's made by planning commission or city council. The limit to 4 stories, I would feel more comfortable with that being kept in the east part and not affecting the west portion. But preference is still 5.
Mhm. So I think we have to respect the vote of the group that it's 5 unchanged.
Eric, Paul, what are your thoughts?
I'm fine with 5 as is. It seems like the bonus floor is aspirational at the moment. There's a little bit of a buffer between there and, the tennis neighborhood, so I'm not too worried. I think most of what will get built there before. And under anyway, if we needed unanimity, I would trade that away to get, the folks who preferred option 2. I don't think we need unanimity. Because I'm more concerned about the minimum of 1 story big box stores. I like grocery stores. I'm worried about a whole bunch of big box stores, so, but, I'm fine with option 5 as it is.
I don't have a strong opinion because I'm uncertain which is more in service to a successful town center. I think that there's an argument to be made that shorter buildings provide more of a welcoming feel to a town center. Whereas I think that if you were adding story only when affordable housing is being placed in the town center, the argument could be that that incentivizes more workforce to have accessibility to a town center, to service the town center at affordable rates. So I guess I would say just, I need more data to
Yeah,
know like.
a strong
which
preference
ones-
either way.
Basically, both could be good outcomes.
So it sounds like we're pretty close to an even split on limiting it to 4 or allowing option 5 to be as is.
Yeah, this is why we
Yeah.
generally go with an odd number, you know?
Maybe.
Oh, poor John. But we could take that feedback to planning commission that
I think
generally
I
consensus
I
over.
feel
Mhm.
I'm okay with option 5 as is. I think even though we don't know that affordable housing is plausible right now in this current environment, we don't know what's gonna happen 20, 30 years from now. And so I would rather have the option there and have it be available. Because I know from my time on the town center task force and on the planning commission, that affordable housing is important to the city as one of the key things that we're trying to achieve. And so I would not want to throw out such a large portion of town center and artificially limit us from having affordable housing in that area.
I think that's all really good input. I think everybody provided a good summary that we will definitely be able to share that level of detail with the planning commission and board your recommendation. I don't know, was somebody else gonna say something? I accidentally interrupted somebody.
I don't mean to further the discussion, but I do want to reiterate having height limits. I do think I would suggest, I don't know what they would be, but I think it would not hurt to have some limits while we're saying stating stories. Just so we don't get something strange. Is there, as a planner, is there a reason you don't want that?
So one of the reasons for having it at story is because the height can sometimes be changing in terms of how a developer wants to design a building and what kind of the floors on a ground floor versus the floors above that are desired to be. And so sometimes you get in a situation where you say it's a 45-foot height limit and somebody wants to propose 47-foot height building. And we don't necessarily want to argue about 2 feet or have that be the reason for something to go in front of, board, because it's not meeting the exact number. So, it is something where we could potentially provide like a story and a number range if we felt that there was value in that to sort of express that or be more clear about what, is a story and, provide some clarification on mezzanines or other, types of situations, because we do have like one of those parts in our design section is like you can't have a false second story facade, right? So like we provided some clarity around that, but maybe not some of the other options that could come to be. So
And for instance, a retail height might be a 10.5 foot ceiling,
mhm,
whereas in
Right.
an office, it's 9.5.
Right.
And I don't know on residential.
right.
What about the fire risk? A good friend of mine, I was sharing some of these things with, and he's a retired fire chief. And he had some concerns about the televisions just for the fire risk.
All of our development goes through the 12th Valley Fire and Rescue. So we have them as part of our development review team. So they see each project that goes through the city and they sign off on development before it can be approved.
And I will also note that, so under state building code, there are things that we have to regulate under the state building code, and then there are additional items that the state building code doesn't regulate, but allows cities to put into their local building codes. So after the Villebois fire, one of the things that was added in was additional measures during construction to ensure that there's more safeguards around fire. In particular, when construction is ongoing, so that is something that we have in our local building code, that's not necessarily in the state building code, in response to that.
So just to, I guess, kind of wrap this up, my informal count was 4 people for option 5 as is, 3 for a modified option 5 that limited mixed use east down to 4 stories max and 1 undecided. You're welcome.
But
Well, and I think what we can say, and just providing further commentary to the planning commission is, I think what I heard from both Elizabeth and Kate was your preference actually was option 2, but you were willing to go to option 5 with that consideration about mixed use. So we can provide that information back to them.
I just wanted to reiterate also that I like the description to add, what you just said earlier about, just lost my train of thought, where you can't just do, height or story, but just put the mezzanine or just put the little description in there. And the reason I just am always about, tracking what was the discussion too, and that's a little nuance that I think is critical, whether it's now or 5 years from now, what was discussed.
Yeah, if nothing else, we could have that's justification.
so I think that takes us to, I do want to make sure we have a little bit of time to talk about the menu, so, I think this takes us to the next option. And I don't know how you would like to facilitate that, Ron, or if you'd like one of us to.
Again, I don't. It's basically whether to eliminate allowing the increase of the building height. Basically to limit, there we go, eliminate the waiver for allowing the increase altogether.
So, yeah, so this was based on, since we can't really do a pause, it's worth asking the question, of whether, and council asked us to ask you. So essentially what we're gonna ask you to do, and if you're ready to do it right away, we can do that, or if you wanna have some discussion first, would be to decide based on basically option 5. And I don't, maybe with a reduction to 4 stories. Would that be your preference? Or would eliminating an increase in building height altogether throughout all the areas be your preference?
For waiver and affordable housing?
Just the waiver.
Just waiver.
Just the waiver. So you'd be getting rid of the waiver to increase, the waiver to decrease,
Waiver for decrease. but-
and a waiver for floor plate, but
Right.
not a waiver to go up. So do you want to eliminate the waiver to go up? Or would you stick with your preferred, the preferred option that just got forwarded? That's essentially what you're kind of voting between, because we're gonna provide them information on, this was the preferred option, here's their input on the other options they voted on. But, a small subset or the vast majority or this number of that number wanna eliminate, and that would be their top pick.
Yeah, so it's still a maximum of 6, a maximum of 5 for affordable housing. The question is, do you allow for the waiver?
Essentially, yes. That's the question that is being posed.
And so now you're basically being forced into essentially the dot exercise again, what's your number 1 and what's your number 2?
Yeah.
But we've just narrowed the pool as to what your options 1 and 2 are.
I would say I'm not interested in eliminating the waiver, allowing the increase.
Can I ask you a question before we move?
Yeah,
I'm sorry. One of the two of the conversations, actually, both the planning commission and the council meeting. It was brought up that the reason to eliminate it, or I think the proposal is to, I'm not using another word. To pause it is just to see how this goes. Once we get urban renewal approved by the public in November, assuming we do get it, approved. Giving it a chance without the waivers. And at any point in the future, then the council can go in and say, of course, the planning group, and you guys would, the staff would go to the council and say, hey, it's not working, we need to revisit this waiver. And I think that was that was the context around the idea of eliminating waivers. So, and I think that's correct. The council can change that, they can add the waivers in at a future date. Yeah, so at least giving it a try. And I really like that idea because, again, of such a strong community desire to keep this town center feeling like a small town and consistent with the original vision of the town center.
The only thing I'll throw in, I hear you, but the original vision of the town center was as it's defined, and that was with significant community input. So I acknowledge that there is a subset of the community now that is not happy with the way it was defined. But the way it was defined is 3 to 4 stories, 3 to 5 stories. And then the way it was implemented was with the waiver allowance. So, and that was with the community having the ability to have the input there as well.
So I'm
Didn't
gonna
the
jump back in
waivers
to what I was
come,
saying
didn't the
before.
waivers come?
Yeah, sorry, please,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah,
let's-
Liz.
yeah, go ahead, please continue.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm not interested in eliminating that, for a few reasons. One, this is a 4-year plan. I think there's a lot of focus on the here and now and what, not necessarily what it's gonna look like in the future, because things could change drastically. What I am interested in is for, I don't know if it'd be planning commission or city council to 5 or 10 years down the road, to reassess how the waivers are going. And if they're still kind of serving the purpose that we want them to serve. I'm worried if we eliminate the waivers that we're gonna be too restrictive. You know, we do want to kind of draw in who we want to draw in to the town center to help maybe attract other people who want to come in and want to build and want to live here. So my main concern with eliminating that is being too restrictive. There was only one person at the planning commission meeting who was in favor of the waivers, and it was pretty clear there was a divide, I'll say, in kind of generations and preferences. So typically, I would say, I think Rick and I have pretty similar viewpoints on all of this, not to put you on the spot there. But I think there's a really different kind of generational divide on what we think is allowable and what we want to see in a town center. And I think that's important to consider in all of this as well. That was
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Chair.
Yeah.
Just have a question. Can you remind us, what did Shari's pursue? That property?
Shari's?
Shari's, did they pursue a waiver?
Yes, they,
And which kind?
so it is, it's in the mixed use that is to the west of the main street. And so that's a 2 to 4 story, and they got a waiver for a 5th story by providing green building techniques and a, additional storefronts fronting the primary street.
And the reason for needing that extra story, was it the economics to make it work?
Yeah, they needed the additional story in order to have enough units for the project to go.
And that's a problem that,
And provide, sorry, to interrupt, and in order to provide the retail desired on the ground floor. So because of the additional cost of the retail on the ground floor, they needed that 5th story of the additional story of units that they don't have on the ground floor in order to help offset the cost and provide the people there for the demand for the retail.
and the Dahlia in Canby is restricted to 4 stories. and it really didn't pencil out well because of the cost of retail in the first floor. Every unit they had to make smaller and smaller to get enough units, to get enough rent to make that maintenance work. So in my opinion, they will pursue the waiver if they really need it to make it work. Somebody is just gonna pursue it. I don't think just because, so in my view, I support keeping the waiver, but I think our menu items need to be a bigger hurdle and more providing more to the community.
I would second that, so to speak. I favor keeping the waiver, but I'm not seeing them all listed here on page 7, but I thought when we were looking at them before, that some of them were a little fuzzy. So they could be defined with more specificity, a little more rigor, some future process, another task force maybe.
Well, I like Cynthia's insight that the waiver options, potentially, the menu options could change over time. The waiver stands as the thing you can get is another story, but what you have to provide might evolve as the needs of the town center.
My comment was more about the waiver versus the menu,
Okay.
but I like that idea.
Fair. Fair.
Yeah, I'm in favor of keeping the waiver options simply because, I mean, like Cynthia and everyone kind of said, is that it gives more flexibility. And since we adopted this plan in 2019, I think we've maybe had just one building be built. So if we get rid of the waiver options, we're just making it less flexible and less likely to have development in our town center. And the waiver options work in our benefit because with the right menu options, they offset the height with things that make it more adhere to our plan or our vision.
I'm still reeling over the generational divide comment. I'm sorry.
I didn't mean offense with it. It's my personal lived experience is all. And it's okay that we have different opinions about it.
So when I came here, it was 30 years ago. And I came here because it was a small town. A lot of people, young people, several friends of mine are younger than you two,
Like,
who don't want
Gen X.
these tall buildings. Okay, so, sorry.
Yes.
It's.
I didn't mean to say it's true across each generation. There's obviously.
Well, you said I really feel like that was the division, which came across as very strong.
For my personal
you,
experience, yeah.
It's just, that was really, wow. Because there's quite a few folks, and you're entitled to your opinion, but I just think that's very. I don't think it's appropriate for this, to give that opinion so strong when we're collectively trying to coming to a vote 30 years from now, because it's all generations. You know?
Yeah.
And it's not being decided by a strong opinion of one that, or your personal experience, that there's a big divide. I disagree. That's my personal opinion. Absolutely disagree with that.
Okay.
What about in terms of the option of waiver and not waiver?
I like the idea, if I'm have to be forced into a waiver, would be into the menu that is more agreeable. I'm more about the small town feel and no waivers at all.
Okay, so your preference would be
No waivers.
Okay,
You know, my preference.
yeah. Yeah. So I think we've gotten everybody's preference on waiver versus no waiver. Other than-
I think the waiver is a healthy option with the menus option. I think a waiver as a concept is worthwhile. The menu is commensurate to the benefit.
I think my leaning is still towards having the waiver. I want flexibility. And given the length of this plan and how long it will take and how long it has already taken to start doing something. You know, the Sherry's property isn't even. It is permitted, but it hasn't even started, and we're 7 years past this concept plan adoption. This is gonna take a while. So I'm okay with the waiver staying.
Excellent. I believe we've heard from all of you, and that will be easy. Well, I don't know if it'll be easy, but we'll be able to pull it together for planning commission.
But I think I wanna make sure that it's clear that we have a majority in favor of keeping the waiver.
Yes.
But we do have people on the task force
Yes.
that strongly believe that
Yes.
it shouldn't be there.
Absolutely.
And I think it's important to make sure that that's clearly communicated to the planning commission and the council.
And I think what we also heard too is that even for people who are supportive of retaining the waiver, the menu items need to be updated for the waiver to be effective.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
sounds like that's a general
Yeah.
consensus of
Yes.
Think so.
everybody.
And
So,
and I think when we're saying updated, do we all agree it's to make it a higher bar? For them?
I'd have to go back and look. I thought it was more, they were just too ambiguous. Which might be kind of similar to what you're saying.
I do think that we've identified some things that probably the bar needs to be raised a bit on it.
Yeah.
So, do you wanna
Sure. Is
kick off the discussion about?
that all right with you, Sharon?
Absolutely.
Okay. I keep trying to facilitate, so I thought I'd make
Okay.
sure I honored your role.
My Pseudo power.
So, I think you guys all came up with some really great suggestions and discussion about the menu items at, your last meeting. And so, we start to just have some internal discussions. We feel like, it's important for us to honor and maintain the kind of two buckets that the planning commission created at the time of creating this waiver, which was one is to offset the impact of this, building that doesn't meet the standards that are in the code. So if they want to go shorter or taller or bigger in footprint, that we're mitigating that building impact in some way through design. And then the second bucket is that then also they need to provide a community benefit. So we feel like that construct is still really good and a good way for us to have this conversation. I think we are open to, what do we do for that? And so we do think that we started coming up with ways to refine either what's already on that list, things from that list we might want to maintain, but then also the addition of some new items that could provide community benefit. And then we have the secondary list that we will get to. But we really wanted to open it up to discussion to you. So we don't have language or anything tonight because we really wanted to just hear from you about what you think the items on the list should be. And these are kind of like the themes that we came up with, but we'd like you to add to this list if you see something missing. If you have specific ideas for how some of this may play out, we would appreciate that. And then one thing I would want to note is that the last meeting we also heard the need for permanence of some kind. And so we do think with some of the things where they're being implemented for the community that we would, in the detailed language, when we actually add code language, we would add that into it to ensure there's permanence. Obviously, an idea here local hiring for the actual construction of the project, that's not going to be necessarily permanent, but it does provide a community benefit to hiring local in our community. So we put that in there because we see that a lot in community benefits agreements. But that's open for you guys to discuss. So,
And if I could just highlight a couple more things, is that since this plan or the development code was adopted, I don't think the city's ACHC existed at that time.
it did not,
Maybe, yeah.
which
So-
is why I
so
think
that's-
it's written the way it is.
Yeah, so there was a discussion around public art at that time. We didn't have our Arts, Culture and Heritage Commission, which oversees our public art program. So, for example, we kept in public art, but then added this element of it has to go through our ACHC for approval. Because at that time, there was a lot of discussion about, well, art is very subjective and who decides? So adding that, and then the other thing, I think it was Cynthia who talked about additional parking. In our, one of our implementation strategy items in the plan is around how we figure out about parking. And so, but right now what we're seeing from development is to make their developments pencil, they do have to provide some amount of parking. So when we were thinking about like, do we try to come up with a number? A number is very challenging because you don't know what the development is going to be. One of the items that is discussed in the plan is around things like a public structure, like a parking structure, or like a centralized parking area. So we added this contribution to parking infrastructure fund as kind of, again, the language could be tweaked, but basically it's that a developer financially contributing to a fund that is the city-led project on how to deal with parking more broadly in the town center, rather than like at a specific development site. So that's how we kind of interpreted a little bit more your idea on the parking issue in particular. But yeah, so these are to start a conversation.
Right.
To see how you feel about these. Do you like other ideas? And like for option 3, obviously, we can take that off.
Do you hate any of them?
Yeah.
Real quick, on the local hiring for development, is the thought that local means Wilsonville or local means South Metro area? What's the thought process behind that? Or is it open?
I would
for
ask you what your
interpretation?
thought process is behind
Okay.
that.
I mean, are developers importing
That was gonna be my
contractors
question.
from far away? It seems like they would be just benefit to them to just have local contractors.
Maybe Harry.
Yeah, I mean, you're gonna get workers as far as the workers gonna drive. But yeah, I mean, it's not unheard of to have, well, frankly, if you're building in like Portland, a lot of workers come from Wilsonville, you know.
Yeah.
For the outlying.
But you're not gonna have a crew coming in from Northern California.
Yeah, there'd just
to
be
come
no
do-
economic reason for
Yeah.
someone to come from that far away, but their cost of living is relatively low, it's already out here.
But you could have a desire, and maybe not, I mean, this could be an item we take off, but as a group, you might have a desire to support. Like hiring a certain percentage from Wilsonville specifically.
But they have to show that the workforce, a certain percentage.
Yeah, I'm not as interested in the local hiring for a smaller city like Wilsonville, and I know we could be getting bigger as this goes on, but. From what I've seen, you tend to see that more in like, Detroit. Or Sharon's maybe. A pretty large black city is not getting any jobs, for white workers, that's in the city that. We're such a small city, kind of in a larger metro area. I don't see that as compelling, unless it has some kind of link like to high school CTE,
Quite
something
honestly,
like that.
since COVID, it is such a scramble for workers and qualified, educated workers. It would concern me if I'm building a building, if I have to hire someone that has to get enough workers from Wilsonville when that would be a
restrictive.
hard part.
Here. My sense is with the menu options, that what we're talking about is a real cost benefit trade-off. We're getting something, we're giving something, and that they ought to all be things that are focused on the success of the town center. Like, in my mind, that is the #1 criterion that they should all meet. And if there are other things that they benefit us by, great. But a town center is a very difficult thing to make work. Like, the most functional town centers are things that have been around for a century and involved in servicing the community that they exist in. So building one from scratch is a very challenging thing. And I think that all of the focus of these menu items should be towards making the town center work. So that would be the lens that I approach this through. And so things like local hiring for development, yes, that might be good for Wilsonville at large and developers who were in this area, but is it good for the town center? I couldn't really make a strong argument for that. Parking, on the other hand, I think is absolutely a good thing for a town center. You want a good experience in a town center and you want it to be accessible. I think those are the two things that, like, if you boil it down, make a town center successful, is it's someplace I want to be and it's easy for me to be there. And parking is a big factor in that, especially in the region that we live in, where things are very car centric still. Starting to nitpick, I would say things like a public rooftop is a very challenging thing
Yeah.
to make functional. I think that rooftops are bugaboo, like, I don't like rooftops, they look really good in a brochure. But unless they're programmed, unless you have a restaurant up there or a garden or a reason for people to be going there on a regular basis, they get forgotten about. They're very out of sight.
And if it is something that has to be accessible to the public, there's liability if it's not monitored or if there's not enough people there. We're having, in the last 2 weeks, we've had one guy come into our office building, cut himself and spread blood all along our hallways and our bathrooms. We've had another guy try to live in our bathroom. So it's not like, oh, Wilsonville doesn't have that problem. We've got some mental health and drug issues going on right now that if I had a building with a public access, I'm gonna want to lock it to keep somebody from going up there and jumping. So, I mean, I'm not trying to be catastrophic, but I would also, when I saw that, I thought I would, yeah, I would, on a 6-story building, see that. Or 5 or 4, that's just me. I would agree, public art, parking. What else does a town center? Plazas.
I think the concept of a fee in lieu for the parking is a really good one to apply elsewhere. I don't think, like, even speaking to art, we want to, maybe you're not, but centralizing that, like making that art be on the property that they're building, like a fee in lieu for a really cool fountain in one of these parks that are being built, I think is just as valuable, if not more valuable, than having a cool structure outside of multifamily building.
Yeah,
Can someone speak to the inclusive design beyond ADA requirements? That's interesting to me. I think that often gets overlooked and a lot of.
Yeah, I think at least one of the things I was thinking about is, if you look in our parks, Wilsonville is very intentional about making sure that there are amenities for all recreators.
I've been on parks that was a part of that.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And so like the slide where kiddos who have the cochlear implants can go down the slides because they don't generate static electricity. It's like those kind of options for everybody to enjoy a space, not just meaning the minimal ADA requirements. That's kind of, I was actually triggered. I was thinking about it in the parks context of like, if you have a plaza, you know, or if somebody has an open space that they're creating anyway, if they could add some of these more inclusive experiences was where my brain was going with it.
And you could also, that could be expanded on to, if you wanted to apply it in a different way, you could also apply it to providing some units within a building that are built to like the universal standard, I think is what it's called. There's 2 levels, A and B. I'm not the expert on this because I'm not a building code person. But you could potentially think about it in that way. So like kind of, it'd be different than like the bonus for the affordable housing, but it would be somewhat similar where you could be like, if they're providing X percentage of units or something like that, that is actually built to that standard. Because a lot of times what we see is, well, like there will be units that are technically accessible and they meet ADA, but then people move in and they have to make a whole bunch of modifications on like interior design in order to truly make it accessible. And so you can have certain number of units that are already designed to those standards. And so that could be part of your discussion too, in terms of inclusive design.
And when I saw that, I thought, oh, it could be inclusive in other ways, like more inclusive of people, families with young kids. Like playground areas or sensory displays or public bathrooms that are better for people with young kids, like lower urinals, having raised 2 boys. Or changing stations. I don't know if any of that's required by Oregon law now. There is no sort of like federal law that I'm aware of that's works like the ADA for young children, but I can think about it in that respect too.
I think, I mean, how is it written in there somehow that the scope of these are commensurate to the benefit that they're getting, but it's not just some small thing, without reaching Dolan,
Right,
we're not
that-
setting too high,
right.
but also not too low.
So that language is technically in there, but also like none of the language for this has been written yet. So we're gonna use your input. So we might even strengthen that language based on the input we get from y'all. So these are more of like the ideas to like generate discussion, but really to get your input. And then that will help us to refine language that will go in front of the planning commission. So you'll not have an opportunity to see it and provide input to us if you'd like to follow up on that discussion.
Well, and I'm thinking also the seniors as well,
Mhm.
having caregived quite a bit and knowing that mobility is an issue. When the weathers shift, even though we have mild, moderate winters, and safety is an issue. Some folks like to walk in an area and feel safe, and ramps are important, rails are important. Carts are important for stability. I don't, old, young, in between, whatever. I just personal experience that, you know, opting that over a park or, and kids too, maybe there's, I'm just thinking pretty strongly that I'm around a lot of seniors, that's been a conversation.
And most buildings, current buildings being built, they don't typically have a step. They oftentimes have rails,
Right,
you know, it is, the current ADA is causes you to build a very different building than anything that's, you know, historical steps and stuff.
and I also know, just in Oregon alone, I've been around, in different jobs where I've had colleagues who've had children.
Yeah.
Who were ADA driven. I've heard firsthand pretty poor stories of not only living, but mobility issues, everywhere, and I was shocked at how few of buildings, commercial buildings, were even equipped, just in all of Oregon. I mean, it blew my mind. This is like back in 2014 and 15, where somebody that had cerebral palsy and someone who had quadriplegia, and just, it was just listening to that. And then on my street alone, we had to put an ADA sidewalks because they hadn't been there. So just, it sort of becomes an afterthought, and I think it's more, especially post-COVID, there's more numbers of folks, and just more, to be more inclusive, I think that just is an important piece.
And maybe you notice, but anytime you're changing an existing building to any degree, you have to examine the ADA to that building and make changes commensurate or more than the improvements you're making.
All the way to the sidewalk.
Yeah, so it can be extremely costly for them. They have to dig stuff up and redo it. I mean,
I guess so that would be based on the population too, right?
and
Which is
that's
interesting.
for the ADA, existing ADA
Just the
requirements. for
space
everybody.
required.
Yeah, space
Space
requirements.
requirements. So if we're talking about something more, we're talking about. That's what I'm trying to understand is what would be beyond that.
Me too, that's why I was asking
Yeah.
what's beyond.
The other thing that I just want to highlight too, to Eric's point, is around supporting existing local business in town center. One of the big concerns from our local business community during the town center planning process was about displacement and basically being priced out of town center. So one of the things, you know, talking about how do we bring it back is either when Miranda and I were talking about this, it was like, you know, maybe that's subsidizing relocation into the building, or it could be something like a fee in lieu that helps businesses.
Support this business economic development business program in town center to help with that transition, because you know, one of the concerns is a new business goes in, you invest major tenant improvements, you're assuming you have 10 years to kind of recoup that cost, but then let's say the property owner decides, yeah, I am gonna resell, and somebody comes in and redevelops it, and now you just spent the first 2 to 3 years of your business trying to get off the ground, and now you're being relocated. Anyway, displaced, thank you. Second night meeting in a row, a little slow, and so, trying to, like, that was definitely a big discussion we had, and so what are ways that we could do that? So it could be money, pay in lieu, it could be you're actually helping to relocate a business that's been displaced. It could be, you know, another thing that I think we talked about was, is there a way to, like, if you're going to build out an interior tenant space for certain kinds of industries, like we know people really want restaurants, and a lot of times what happens is, like, the shell is built, there's the ground floor is improved, but it's very costly to retrofit in order to add the required like venting and grease traps and other things. And so could it just be that like we have some, I don't want to say favorite types of like commercial use or businesses, but if we do, that if you're putting that infrastructure into the building, oh, that's in the next one.
Yeah, it is.
I jumped ahead.
You did, but that's, I mean,
But is the desire of like building tenant ready space for desired businesses and like, would that get you, is that enough? Like, maybe it's not, maybe we don't feel like that's enough, but we definitely run into this situation a lot in commercial spaces. And so that would be a potential option we could put on the table for you to discuss.
yeah, so for example, the local restaurants is what we hear
Uh-huh.
time and again. And if a tenant space is not built with that, to be ready for that, the cost, it's cost prohibitive
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
a local restaurant to go into that space and make those retrofits.
And so that was a menu item. So we kind of have small business on both of them in different ways.
I'd say I like what Eric said about having stuff that supports the town center or the town center plan to make it work. I think I'd agree the same about the public rooftops, unless it's a restaurant or something up there. I don't know that I'd necessarily want to go up there unless there was kind of something for
The point of it was that it would be programmed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
With like a restaurant bar.
Right. Right. And so, and it's an option. So it's not something that'd be required of anybody who doesn't want to take on the liability. But if they were to be like, oh yeah, we're gonna have an office building and we're gonna have a restaurant on the rooftop. That was something we heard a lot during town center. About the desire for like rooftop amenities and being able to see the beautiful view of Mount Hood. And so it was just an idea we had, but it could be a terrible one that never gets chosen.
I like
But the
that.
point was, is it would have to be programmed. It wouldn't just be like,
Okay.
Open to
Yeah.
the public.
I think the challenge though is the permanency around
Yes.
that. How do you say you must have a restaurant occupying that space?
That'd
And
be
if the
kind of
restaurant
like-
goes in and then goes out of business,
Yeah.
and now what?
mhm.
You know? The permanent, it just makes it hard.
Right.
I struggle to see that one be effective.
I also like the inclusive design, the parking infrastructure fund. And I really like the supporting existing local businesses in some way where we can keep them.
So you said the art, the inclusive design,
Yeah.
did I hear that right? And the supporting local businesses
The
Yeah.
parking.
Parking.
and the parking.
Yeah. Wait, you finished?
Yes.
I would agree with kind of the conversation, like probably nixing the local hiring for development. Because I'd like to focus on town center plan or mission. And I really like the idea of having inclusive design particularly. And public art as well, so yeah.
How do we feel about plazas?
I love plazas.
And I will say that public gathering spaces is also one of the top things that is discussed as part of the town center plan, a desire for
This is
that.
one of the 6 goals.
If you're living, if we have structured parking, having someplace where they can sit outside, and, you know. Kind of the Italian concept of going out and socializing and all.
Yeah, I much prefer a restaurant where you can sit outside and not have a parking lot right there in front of you. I like plazas, and piazzas.
Yeah, if it's well done.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the challenge of, okay, you have one here and then you've got nothing, you know, so you've got a, 150 square foot plaza area that services one business.
There are minimum standards for plazas.
Okay.
That was put into the code, just as.
Good.
So you can't have 150 square foot plaza.
Yes, and so what I generally am hearing too is that some updates to the language that basically says something to the effect of, furthers the vision and goals of the town center plan, you know, as question. As reflected in these menu items, and I think, I can't remember, actually, no, I should look back at
I
my.
mean, what if they come up with something that isn't?
So the other thing too that I think. I'm trying to remember if I put it in the staff report, is that we also are recommending sort of a catch-all at the end that basically says. Yeah, a catch-all item of other innovative ideas that achieve each of the two categories and is reflected in the vision and the goals of the town center plan. So kind of like that whole thing of, it's a 40-year plan, we don't know what might be a really cool thing that comes 20 years from now. And so having an additional catch-all that sort of allows some additional flexibility for something that we just haven't contemplated. And that is getting back to Miranda's point about the subjectivity around the waiver process, is there, we do have that flexibility to say, like, this isn't good enough, like, you're not achieving, we can't make a finding that you're actually achieving the vision and goals of the town center plan the way that you've modeled this, you know.
This isn't enough.
So to honor everybody's time, why don't we just look at the next one? I would like some input on the mitigating building impact if we can. So the idea, I'll run through some of these. The idea here is really, especially if you're having like a bigger building that then makes, you know, your connections less often or less storefronts, and it's less interesting for pedestrian experiences. What can be done on the ground floor design to help improve that? If it's based on the design of the building, how do we do best practices to create more light and air? So if we're going taller, step backs come into play currently in the code. But are there other things that we could do for that? Creating a community gathering space internal to the building is another one. So this could be something like the example of a Whole Foods that also has like a coffee shop, or like the New Seasons that's in Tualatin that also has like that I don't know what you would call it, but like kind of like dining area. And maybe that's not a high enough bar, but like that's kind of the intent behind it, so that it's creating that additional kind of connection point with the community, something that's more interactive. Promoting environmental stewardship is one of the 6 goals. We recognize that the way it's written now is outdated, so looking at still keeping that, but updating the language. And then building tenant ready space for desired businesses, which we kind of touched on a little bit in terms of what we meant by that. And we would like to hear from you if you like that one, what the desired businesses would be.
And I would also just add, Miranda's already touched on this, but for the things that we might have concerns particularly around permanence, so things like a community gathering space or tenant ready space where that could be changed. What we've talked about is basically that there would be a recorded document against the property, so that way if it is sold, it is recorded that this amenity has to continue. Essentially a deed restriction on the property.
And I think we'd want to do that on the plaza or, you know, art or whatever. That it could be upgraded, but can't be removed, something like that.
I think one challenge with any of these, especially when you start to include fees and lieu, which again, I think that's a really good option to include. Is figuring out a way to word them in such a way that the effort to achieve one of these is commensurate to the cost of paying the fee and lieu. I think what you want to avoid is scenarios where you need to add a brick facade or something that costs $10,000. The fee and lieu is always going to be $50,000. And you just never make that fee and lieu a desirable choice. It's challenging. I don't have the answer, but I'm just saying that would be, from my perspective, something that would be worth considering. Almost boiling these down like on a separate sheet of paper to criteria that all generally cost about the same amount to execute.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
During review, right, the city could decide if people are consistently choosing the waiver option for a fee in lieu, we could decide we want more people adding the paying that, so we could request that they switch, right? no, since it's one of the.
I mean, that is the hard part of, that is the one thing about having menu items, is that when you have menu items, it's their option to, I would say, to select whether or not, especially if it's not the fee, if it's something else, if they achieve the vision and goals of the town center plan is a little bit more discretionary, but I think if it's there, you're saying it's an option that they can exercise.
And so there might be things on the menu where you don't want it to be either or.
That is this and.
Well, no, just that like, for example, you might not want to just allow a fee in lieu of the public art. You might want to make sure that art is installed with the project. So that might be an area where you don't want to have it be like, provide the public art through this process or pay a fee in lieu. Like, we don't have to provide the option of paying a fee in lieu for everything we put on the menu, if that's what I'm trying to say.
It should be specific.
Right,
I think.
Right,
we should
so-
identify the ones we care about that would benefit from a fund where you could pool money to do
Right.
something larger than what an individual developer would do.
that's one thing to consider, yeah, so. I'm just saying that like, cause then you don't have to like, for every menu option, go through this. What is the commensurate fee that we would want?
Yeah.
Well, but even if you, I think you still need to do that exercise, because if you have. Fee in lieu of, a parking fund, parking structure fund, and you have a facade improvement, and you have public art. And this one costs 5,000, this one costs 10,000, this one costs 50,000. Nobody's gonna pick the 50,000,
Mhm.
they're gonna pick the 5 and 10.
Right.
And I think that's what Eric's getting
Gotcha.
to is trying to have some parity around the options to make sure that there is a possibility that if we care about all of them, that there's an option that they're chosen.
I don't want to blow it up and reconstruct it, but it might be a different way of approaching this to say. The waiver is granted if you execute something in service to the town center commensurate that would be equivalent to $50,000 of value. Right, and then you say things that will be considered as, as acceptable include this menu of items. And it's up to you to bring the evidence that this is a $50,000 value.
So
whatever
basically,
number.
yeah,
That's right.
that tracks, so basically it's almost like a point-based system, but it's being achieved in dollar amount.
Yeah, it kind of makes.
So
me
like
think about-
some items, like you might do a combination of 4 items to equal 50,000, or you might just pay 50,000 into the parking fund.
But it's gotta also be based on your development size, because a $50,000 contribution to a
Right,
fund
yeah.
Mhm.
for a 6 million square foot development is different than a 50,000 square foot.
Sure, you could say
So
2% of your
square
building
foot.
cost or something.
I mean, we do, how we charge our, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think how we charge our building fee is based on. The value of the development,
Mhm.
so there could be a way of tying the dollar amount that needs to be spent on whatever
The percentage of building.
I'll say from a
Project cost.
developer's perspective, that makes it super clean.
Yeah.
And you can get a lot of really good feedback to say, we're not doing this, we're not taking the waiver because it's too much, right? And then you just dial it back until it's right. And I bet there's a sweet spot that is boiling down to money, frankly.
Yeah.
That is gonna be the tipping point between them actually taking that extra floor and providing the benefit or not.
0.5% of building.
But will
value or
we
something.
always just be getting the money and not?
But that may be okay. I guess
So-
maybe that's some of the
That's
question that
the
we need to
question.
answer is, is there a bigger benefit to pooling money and doing something larger, like a parking structure near, Main Street district, so everybody can, given the current
Mm.
auto-centric environment, be able to get to the area and walk,
Mm.
within a short distance to all the major things? Is that more important than, a
piece of
local
art.
public art,
Mhm.
installation?
I mean, you could also imagine as properties come up for sale, the city's involved in that process and they've accrued enough funds to buy it and make a parklet or go into negotiations for a partnership or do a public-private partnership and have an easement for a plaza instead of just waiting for someone to build the right plaza for you.
Mhm.
I do think some of these will be difficult to put a dollar figure on, like,
Yeah, I think it would be up to
community
them.
gathering space.
You have to be able to bring them.
My
persuasive
concern is
argument.
it's not enough on some of these, you know. What in somebody's subjective opinion is artwork, is this piece of artwork, you know, versus giving them money.
Well, I think it would have to be approved by the Arts, Culture and Heritage Commission.
Right,
I think that's a requirement for all public.
that's in proportion to the benefit that they're receiving for the development. That's where I don't know if it get lost
Yeah.
in the subjectivity.
Yeah, art
Does it-
versus dollars is a
Yeah.
tough one. You're always gonna have tension in
A
having that
banana duck
conversation.
go along for
Yeah.
$1
And
kind of-
Paid the artist.
Yeah, and kind of to Eric's point, what, going back to like the public art, what it could be is a fee in lieu to the city's.
Yep.
Public art fund, that is then executed by the ACHC, that is putting public art, you know, in public space.
I think that's where it belongs, right in the middle of one of those blue parklets instead of on the street.
Yeah, I like how clean that sounds to have, that sort of setup where they can pay a fee, can figure it out and dial it in, or pick some of these items that make their development more adhere to the mission or vision.
I like that as an option, but it sounds like. Who would be responsible for looking into that more to, figure out what that sweet spot is, but. Sounds like it could be a good option.
Long term, any of
That's a
these,
good question. Who would name, those are good options, but
verify that it's in states.
and relevant. Over time.
I mean, I did like the idea that was proposed, I think, by Eric, about like that the menu would be revisited every so often. I mean, if you're working toward like if there's a lot of consensus for this idea of like some level of like investment into like, I mean, you could call it like a town center enhancement fund or something. And it has to be based on the value of your building, like they may not even choose the menu items, they could just put it into there and it goes to these different things. And maybe you either have the menu that is not adopted by ordinance. Like the thing that's in the ordinance is what the value and how it gets put into a fund, but then how that's distributed becomes a part of a resolution that can be updated and not be tied to the code. It can also be tied to a program. Like, so we could think about like, is it instead tied to a program if you're just creating a fund now that could go to different things?
And it gives council more control over it rather than like a developer coming in us reacting to
Their proposal.
their proposal.
You could also make that menu more vague up front, right? So
Right.
it's contributing towards the success of the town center in the categories of X, Y, and Z. And then like more specifics would be provided, you know, behind the curtain where, oh, these are the things, if people bring us these certain things, these are things we're really looking for. If someone's asking, you know, right now, a plaza would be great. And be willing to do a plaza. Because I do think that a menu can be challenging for the reasons you described with it being written. It was like, well, you gotta give it to them if they choose it.
For the tenant friendly spaces,
Mhm.
I like the option of restaurants. It made it sound like it's very difficult, it's not very filled out. So I like the option of
Thank you.
having that in there. And then healthcare facilities as well. I mean, there wouldn't be anything right now, but with the municipalities and clothing, that one's been around for a long time, and the city doesn't have that anymore. So I think incentivizing another, so. Would be beneficial.
Did I put that in there?
It's
I was gonna say, I thought I put that, I was like.
That sounds like a
That's
great
where we got
idea.
it from.
Yeah.
Been writing too much lately, so.
And then I like the other thing you have on here, the kind of catch-all item. Innovative.
And it- even if we don't have the rooftop amenities as a programming feature, I think we should, I would encourage that we allow it.
Yeah. It's definitely allowed.
Okay,
Mhm.
so if somebody is adding floors, they are allowed. to
Yeah.
do-
It doesn't count as a story.
Right, yeah. Because I think if it's desirable, I think it will happen.
Yeah,
Because they can make money off the roof.
yeah. Well, I would say, especially since half of us are on staff. We want to be respectful of your time, but thank you for giving us a little extra time tonight. Thank you for your invaluable input. I thought that this was really great, like, this was really great discussion, so,
Thank you guys for the opportunity.
Yeah.
yeah.
And
Thank
all
you.
of the materials you provided, a lot.
Is this the last meeting, or do you think there's going to be a follow-up?
We will be, for the task force, that's probably TBD.
Okay.
I think our goal is, it goes back to planning commission, depending on.
I think we have planning commission and city council.
And city council in June, depending on how that goes. It's possible that we would reconvene if we feel like we need additional input somewhere.
Sure.
I'm really intrigued by tonight's discussion, and I already know what's gonna happen is I'm gonna lay down and think about it, and then I'm gonna get up in the morning, I'm gonna get ready and think about it. And it's, I think, this, especially around this menu, I think it's a really interesting idea of how we might shift in a completely different direction, but to achieve the same outcomes. So I could see that looking a lot different than how you've seen it so far. So I would encourage you to look at the planning commission packet when it comes out. And if you want to come and testify or submit a written comment about like what you see there, please do. I think that would be valuable for them to hear. I'm not sure yet kind of where that will land, honestly. So depending on how those discussions go, we might reconvene you to discuss that more. But I feel like you gave some pretty clear direction on the preferred option. And your input on whether or not to get rid of the increase. So I feel like that is pretty strong direction for the planning commission and city council to consider. So I don't know if we would need you on that item, but we'll see. That's kind of where it stands.
Cool. All right, 7:22, adjourned.
Good job, Sharon. I'm sorry I tried to steal your thunder a few times.
It's okay, I'm used to it.